Hello there! The other day I was watching a video about an ex-heroin addict who explained what it's like to be addicted to heroin. And it got me thinking, why is heroin so addictive? I mean, whenever someone talks about heroin, it's usually a comparison with some other substance that's also addictive. Something like sugar, or nicotine, or alcohol, or League of Legends. So, let's first take a look at what heroin exactly is. It's an opioid that is derived from the opioid poppy. It was first banned in the United States in 1924, about 100 years ago. This means that heroin is an illegal substance. Heroin travels to the brain very easily. Usually it's very difficult to find some kind of medicine that will travel from the bloodstream into the brain, because in between you have this blood-brain barrier, as it's called. And if you want medicine to be effective, you already have a lot of rules that it has to adhere to. For example, if it's too water soluble, it will just remain in the blood. But if it's too fat dissolvable, it will just get stored into the fat under your skin. So there needs to be a right balance from where it can be transported through the body. And heroin has pretty much the ideal balance between these two properties. Once inside the brain or the central nervous system, opioids will bind to opioid receptors. Normally, endorphins will bind to these opioid receptors. But heroin and other opioids, they will bind to this receptor a lot better than the stuff that you can naturally find inside of your body. There are multiple opioid receptors such as mu, kappa, delta, but that's not really interesting. Usually when you have a receptor, it will only bind certain molecules that fit exactly or pretty much exactly. And then the protein can perform a certain action or stop performing a certain action. In this case, the result of opioids or endorphins binding to the opioid receptor means the release of dopamine, which is the molecule that will make you feel happy. But with opioid receptors you have the so-called Morpheme rule, and the closer a certain molecule follows these set of rules, the better it will bind to the opioid receptor. Now, this rule is there needs to be a carbon atom with 4 different other carbon atoms that are connected to it, such as you can see in this molecule right here. One of these carbon atoms has to be part of a phenyl group, which will be in red right here once again. There also needs to be a nitrogen atom with 3 carbon atoms attached. And between this carbon atom and the nitrogen atom, there needs to be a certain distance of multiple carbon atoms. So, the binding will cause the release of dopamine, which will make you feel a lot of pleasure. But the brain cannot tell the difference between endorphins that should bind to the receptor and morphine and other opioids that also bind to the receptor. Because heroin or morphine or something else will bind to this receptor very well, a lot more signal will be released. And at some point the brain will get kind of used to it and decide, you know what, let's tone this signal down a bit. And because of that, your brain will not react to normal dopamine levels anymore, only to heroin. And in this way, heroin can kind of reconstruct your brain and make you addicted. This is because normally everyone always feels a bit of stress naturally. And when you take heroin, all of that stress will just go away. Not only that, but heroin and morphine also stopped signals that would normally stop the dopamine release. And besides this, of course, heroin and morphine mainly are used to stop pain. So, why is heroin so addictive? Well, usually people get addicted to something else, such as codeine, oxycodone, or morphine first. And heroin is a lot cheaper than those medicines. So when people are kind of looking for the high or for the thrill, and they get heroin once, which is more effective, then they'll pretty much instantly become addicted. But over time you'll become kind of tolerant towards heroin as your body will adapt to it, and you'll need higher and higher and higher doses to get the same amount of effect. I had a professor of mine who studied the perfect levels of morphine to give to newly born babies to stop them from feeling pain during surgery and such. And she told us basically that the reason why babies don't get addicted is because they're not looking for that high. For them it's just meant to stop the pain, and they don't have any experience with that. And because of that, babies who get morphine rarely get addicted to it. But what does morphine have to do with heroin? Well, heroin more easily travels from the blood to the brain through the blood-brain barrier. And once it's inside the brain, it will be broken down into morphine. And because of this, heroin is more addictive than morphine because it more easily travels to the brain, and then you'll get a higher dose of it once it's converted into morphine, which means that it will be more effective than morphine. So the next fun thing, if you take too much heroin, you will get an overdose. And what you can do when you get an overdose is you can take naloxone, which is an antagonist of the receptors. So basically, the effect of morphine will get nullified. But that doesn't mean that you should just take a lot of heroin and then naloxone in order to stop the damage. Also, fun thing about overdoses of heroin, it can cause damage to the liver. So, what about long-term use of heroin? Well, first of all, when you try and quit, you'll become more sensitive to the pain. Because once again, heroin will affect the pain receptors. So, when you stop using it, you'll become more sensitive to pain. There's also the possibility of you getting osteoporosis, and if you're a male, then you'll have lower testosterone levels. Some fun withdrawal symptoms are nausea, vomiting, muscle aches, cramps, sweating, anxiety, inability to sleep. So yeah, don't do drugs, kids. Anyway, that's it. I hope you learned something or at least enjoyed yourself.